Well, welcome back. I had a busy night upgrading my facilities. I don't know if the upgrade is worth it. Other than visually for me, it was supposed to make my sound better. I now have, except for this microphone that I've been using here for over 10 years, everything in my house is upgraded audio wise. So I'm just going to get into reading. This is chapter 8. It's the shortest chapter probably so far, and hopefully we will not be spending forever at it. So here we go. Jim got to the turbo lift and found that Spock had already caught one, losing him. I'll never understand how he always manages to get a lift so fast. Maybe he has an understanding with the computer. The next lift arrived after what seemed several hours. When Jim stepped out of it onto Deck 4, down the hall from astrocartography, he could hear excited voices already. He followed them into the big astrocartography lab and found Spock and Mary Sagatti and Danish all bent over a huge work table covered with live readouts and a hard copy. "Look at that light curve, Mr. Spock. It's flat." Instrument failure. "Sir, give me a break. You know very well I would triple-check the instrumentation before calling you in. It's clean. Besides, look at the other stars in the cluster. There are all shades of curve, from bare fluctuation to near normal." "What asymptotic relative efficiency?" Point, 335 so far." "Have you determined an average of curve orders?" "Will someone please," Jim began. The jangling down the hall alerted him. He had just enough time to move out of the doorway before Catullus came charging through it, an effect like being almost run over by a xylophone. "Someone tell me what's going on," Jim said. The three at the table looked at him with mild surprise.
"I'm telling you, sir,"
Danish said, and left the group. Catullus replaced him, climbing up onto a chair to look down at the data. And the polite wrangling began again. Jim let Danish lead him over to another readout console.
"This is something really extraordinary, Captain,"
the Sadrau said, sitting down at the console and bringing up a graph on the wall screen.
"What I'm showing you is the way we get a sense of how any given star behaves over a length of time. We plot the star's absolute magnitude. That's its brightness on a standard scale, on the vertical line of the graph. Then the period of time over which we're observing it goes on the horizontal line. The methods being used in the past mostly for variables, but now we use it for all kinds of stars to forecast stellar weather. There's always a little fluctuation in the curve, even with the steadiest stars."
Danish patted the console, brought up a sample curve.
"Saturn, my home star. See the curve? A very, very slight fluctuation, but regular. But look at one of the stars from the Lesser Magellanic."
Another graph came up, and the star's magnitude line ran as straight across it as a flat EKG. Jim shuddered. Even knowing as little as he did about the subject, he was disturbed. "Implications?" Danish looked disturbed too.
"Sir, I'm not sure. The most obvious one is impossible."
"What is it?"
"That entropy's not working there."
Jim nodded. "Thank you, Ensign." He turned away from the console and stepped back over to the table. "Uncomfortably like symbiotic stars. Prolonged reverse novae? Tachyon artifact. Unsupported theories about temporospatial soluency." "Pardon me," Jim said a bit loudly. They all looked up at him again. "I get the feeling that this is going to go on a while," Jim said. "Please don't forget, you have a briefing at point 7. And if you get done squaring the circle before then, I'd appreciate a call." "Yes, sir," Spock said, and looked back down at the readouts. Beside him, as Jim walked away, he heard Catullus chime softly. "Spock, I thought you did that last year." There was a second's worth of silence. "The captain is very busy," Spock said. "Doubtless he is behind in his journals. Now, about this pattern." Jim passed by Recreation's lower level on his way to the bridge. The soundproofing wasn't working there either. The sounds of laughter and singing were evident even out in the hall. For curiosity's sake, he stepped in. Harb's forest was back up again. From it came the sounds of smothered chortling, of leaves rustling, and footsteps moving softly or running. Phaser wine and an intolerably bright flash of pink-white light erupted in the forest, then vanished, to be followed by laughter and cheering. From the sound, there were about 20 crew people playing hide-and-seek in the forest, with phasers set on tag. Jim went in, walked around the fringes of the forest, and passed the line where the holography stopped. On its far side was normal lighting, and more merriment. About 30 people were sitting around in one of the conversation pits. They had appropriated Spock's Vulcan synthesizer harp, a couple of guitars, a squeeze box, and several other instruments Jim didn't immediately recognize. At the top of their lungs, or other vocalizing apparatus, they were singing one of the choruses from that bawdy ballad about the improbable offspring of the marriage between an Altassa and a Vulcan. "Oh, I was the strangest kitty that you have ever seen. My mother, she was orange, and my father, he was green." Quietly, so as not to disturb them, Jim made his way along one side of the room and sat down in a small sheltered alcove that was a favorite spot of his. Right across the great room from him, past the singing crewmen, was the display where paintings and pictures and solids of all the past enterprises were collected. An assortment of sloops and yachts and steamships, wet navy vessels and early spacecraft. But beside him, spotlit on its pedestal, was something he loved better than all the pictures. It was a wooden figurehead carved in the shape of an embowed, cheerfully grinning dolphin, worn, worm-holed, its paint flaking with age. The original figurehead of the schooner Enterprise that Stephen Decatur sailed against the Barbary pirates at Tripoli 400 years before. He put out a gentle hand to touch it, then let the hand fall and sat back in the chair watching the singers. Only 10 or so of the group were Earth-human. The others were a wild assortment. Andorians, Shadiru, Capellus, and Adaran, Denabelid, a Tellarite, even a Bellatrix singing in duet with itself, and a Mrate from one of the Difdani worlds making a mirthful howling like a wolf saluting the moon. The harmony the group made was an odd one, but it made up in enthusiasm what it lacked in orthodoxy. "Now my mother hated greenery, my father hated meat, and neither one would feed me what the other one would eat." "They'd all find their way into the same key eventually," said Harb Tanzer, who, with his usual quietness, had appeared leaning on the wall to Jim's right. "What amazes me is that they're singing at all. Oh, it's not so odd. Most crews will play more and enjoy it more, the more stress they're under." "That always used to seem strange to me," Jim said. "Now it doesn't so much. I guess because I see the response so often, but I still wonder about the reasons for it." Harb glanced down at Jim as the singers went into the verse about what the halfling's pet Rouge thought of the whole situation. "So have recreation people for a lot of years now. All we know for sure is that it's nothing so simplistic as tension release, or almost never just that. Beyond that," Harb shrugged, "there are lots of theories. We have fun fighting over them." "Any favorites?" Harb nodded, smiling, and looked out at the singers again. "One, that fun is good for the brain. That's not really a theory, though. We know that fun causes the secretion of endorphins, regenerates the transmitter areas of the neurons or neuron analogs in most of the known species. Even Klingons have to have fun sometimes. Though definitions of fun differ. Of course. There's another story I like that I ran into a while back. It doesn't satisfy Occam's razor, but in some moods it definitely satisfies me." Jim looked up, curious. "You get to know quite a few people rather well in my line of work, and there's something I've noticed about the most successful of them. A common quality. The people themselves all have different names for it, but from where I'm standing it looks like they're playing their lives like a game. With energy, delight, usually not with too much anger. They tend not to be poor losers, either in card games or command." Harb considered Jim for a moment. "I wonder sometimes if they know something the rest of us don't. Sir, this is all generalization. There are always exceptions. There's nowhere near enough data to base a genuine hypothesis on. But what if what we call life truly was a game, as some of, say, the Terrene religions imply it is? A game with what object? Jim said, mildly interested. Harb made a gesture that indicated infinite possibilities. Redemption, or union with God, or purposes that seem less important to us, say, whipping up a universe so that you have somewhere to play when you've got an eternity to kill. You could make a case for all kinds of purposes, religious and otherwise. Those don't matter for the purpose of this theory. What I'm leading to is that if life truly were a game and it started to get stressful and you had time for being and you had for the time being forgotten it was a game, as people do even when they're playing something as harmless and remote from reality as a board game. I seem to remember spending a certain amount of time sulking the last time I had to sell someone Park Place, Jim said. I had such plans. Sorry, go on. Then if you had forgotten you were already playing, what would you do to deal with the stress? Jim considered the conclusion for a moment before he said it out loud. Go off and play. He sat there for a while, quiet, while Harb stood beside him. If anything does surprise me, Harb said eventually, it's that crew people are as calm as they are. Usually on a dangerous mission or a really stressful one. A lot of people come down here for contact sports or martial arts workout. Not this time out, though. Jim had a thought. Who's ship's chaplain this 10-day? Harb grinned at him. Funny you should ask. I am. How's business? Brisk. A lot of people are coming in to talk about their inversion experiences. Trouble? No. Laughter at the end of a song drowned Harb out. The singing group plunged directly from the green and orange song into a favorite space chanty. To sail on a dream in the sun-fretted darkness, to soar through the starlight unfrightened, alone. Save it for the briefing, Jim said. He looked across at the chorusing crewman, shaking his head. Sometimes I wish I had your job. Sorry, Harb said. No trade. I know. Jim glanced up at the lower levels windows, through which the galaxy looked. I wouldn't trade either, really. I know, Harb said. Jim stood and headed for the doors. If he got to the briefing room now, he would have half an hour to consider his options before the briefing started. He had a feeling he was going to need that extra time. No entropy. Enterprise. Starship, the places you've been to, the things you've shown us, the theories you tell. Enterprise, Starship, we sing to your spirit, the beings who've served you so long and so well. Report, Jim said. There were 9 of them around the table in main briefing. Spock and Uhura and Scotty and Chekhov and Harb, with Catullus hanging over the edges of one seat between Mr. Matlock, the security chief, and Dr. McCoy. I will go first, if that is agreeable to everyone, Spock said. Captain, the inversion apparatus has brought us to the exact position outside the galaxy that our orders indicated, but not without complications, as all of us have noticed. I will leave the psychological and emotional aspects of inversion to Dr. McCoy and Mr. Tenzer, who are better equipped to deal with them than I. Of primary interest to the science department is the problem with the stars in several globular clusters on the far side of the Lesser Magellanic. I have repeatedly checked our sensors and information systems and found them to be performing faultlessly. This leaves me with the disturbing but fascinating conclusion: on the far side of the Lesser Magellanic, the passage of time itself is being inhibited, even halted. The stars in that area, though burning, are doing so most atypically. They are not losing energy. Spock stopped, as if even he needed a moment to recover after saying something so outrageous. This single discovery is more important than the most important conceivable utterance that Starfleet might have sent us to investigate. The data we have so far threaten to affect the whole fabric of physics, not just the classical forms, but even non-hominid scolia such as the Catullus. She will add more about the problem in a moment. But my recommendation as science officer is that we immediately set out for that area on the other side of the Lesser Magellanic and investigate it more closely.
There's a problem with that, Scotty said. We've been fine in inversion, as might be expected. We don't really exist then. But what happens to a starship's operating systems when the ship does exist? And you take it into a place where time isn't running at the right rate, or is frozen, as seems to be over there. For that matter, what happens to us? What if we get caught there? We could be trapped there forever and never notice.
I have a solution for that problem, Cthulhu said. The inversion apparatus is capable of more functions than the mere generation of the point of infinite mass. I won't trouble you with the physics here, but I can generate a protective field, a shell of entropy, if you like, that we can take with us into that troubled area. It would be similar to the double-walled warp field that keeps speed of light normal inside the ship while she's running in subspace, where that speed is higher, and protects the ship's devices and crew from having to deal with the higher speed.
Are you sure it will work, lass?
Montgomery. Of course. It's just a function of the relatedness of...
Cthulhu, Jim said. What was the rest of the problem?
Oh, simply this. We are a long way from the globular clusters in question, too far even with high-resolution tachyar sensing to resolve two important questions. First of all, is this phenomenon complete in itself, or does it have a locatable source? Second, there's also a lot of interstellar dust in the way. It is interfering with our spectral readings, several of which have indicated something rather frightening. The appearance of the spectral characteristics that preceded the explosions of 109 Piscium and Zeta 10 Scorpii. We must go there, at a safe distance of course, and have a better look, assemble more data. For at present, we have a fairly high and unresolved probability that we are somehow involved in the loss of entropy over there. We may even be its proximate cause. And if we are, it falls to us to examine the situation and deal with it.
Everyone sat quiet for a few seconds. Thank you, Jim said, for not saying, I told you so.
Architectrix forbid, sir.
Yes. Who's next? I am, McCoy said. Jim. This last inversion experience added a new facet to the one before. Just about all our crew people found themselves in other people's memories or experiences. What's surprising is that hardly anyone was really disturbed by the situation, even though some of the experiences were, again, rather private. I attribute this partly to the superior gestalt that has always characterized this ship. Enterprise people stick together. They support each other and aren't upset by one another's company in crisis situations. Also, once again, most of the experiences were joyous, or at least very interesting. But I don't know how long that'll continue. The other thing I'd suggest is that the experiences seem to get more profound with longer jumps. How long would this next one be? 102,000 light years, Spock said. Even longer than the last one. Wonderful, McCoy exhaled. Jim, good luck, and your crew have saved your ass, and all of theirs so far. But I can't guarantee what will happen on that next jump. Harb, Jim said, how have they been with you?
Excited, Harb said, eager to get on with it. And as I mentioned to you, there's been a lot of socializing, groups getting together, larger groups than usual. I could see that as being an effective shared experience during inversion. I don't see it necessarily as a bad one, nor do I see it affecting the crew's work habits adversely. People are going back on shift on time, as usual, and the computer reports effectiveness levels commensurate with expected stress, or higher.
I agree, McCoy said.
If we go to look at these stars, Uhura said, that'll mean we'll have to postpone the sowing of the targeting boys, Captain.
Agreed. But Starfleet won't mind.
I just wish there were some way to let them know about it, Uhura said. Heaven forbid, but if we should get in trouble out there, they should know where we were headed and what we'd found. Unfortunately, we've known from the beginning that we were going to be far, far out of subspace radio range.
I can do something about
that, Cthulhu said. Or at least I think I can. If mass can be put through inversion, there's no reason energy can't be put through too. Compile a message and I'll send it back attached to an inversion, along with instructions for the people back at Fleet on how to do the same thing. We can have communication as soon as they rig another inversion apparatus for it. Do that then. Meanwhile, Jim said, I'm determined to make this next jump. I agree with Mr. Spock. Our purpose requires that we investigate such anomalous phenomena wherever we find them, whatever Starfleet had in mind for us initially. And, if we're going to be using this drive on a regular basis anyway, we'll need all the data we can get on how it operates. Any dissenting opinions? No one said anything. Recommendations? The fervent invocation of deity? McCoy muttered. Noted and logged, Bones. Anyone else? Harb Tanzer looked at Jim for a moment before saying, By the captain's leave, you might stop into Rec and talk to the crew for a little while, sir. They're worried about you. Also noted, Mr. Tanzer, Jim said. Mr. Chekhov, Mr. Spock, work out our course for the troubled area and pass it on to Cthulhuc. Notify me when it's set. We'll jump immediately. I want to get to the bottom of this. Dismissed. The officers of the Enterprise went their various ways. Only Jim remained seated in the empty room, his face very calm, as his mind went over the words of the filthiest spacer's song he knew, the one about the weird-looking thing with all the eyes and the asteroid miner's daughter. He got up and went out, humming.